So I want you to picture this scenario for a second. You're standing right outside the headquarters of, let's say, a modern, multi-billion-dollar enterprise.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right. And inside this building, they have spent tens of millions of dollars on state-of-the-art software firewalls.
Oh, absolutely.
They've got this flawless zero-trust network architecture where, every single byte of data is scrutinized.
The whole 9 yards?
Exactly. They have this elite cybersecurity team, and they're monitoring global threat intelligence feeds 24 hours a day.
Sounds like a digital fortress.
It is. It's an absolute fortress. But then an attacker wearing just a completely generic delivery uniform walks right past the front desk holding a clipboard.
Right. Nobody questions the person with a clipboard.
Never. So they stroll up to the server room door, pull a small tension wrench out of their pocket, and they pick the deadbolt in under 30 seconds.
Just like that.
Just like that. They step inside, plug this tiny, basically undetectable Wi-Fi keylogger into the back of a server keyboard, turn around, and walk out. Without touching a single line of code, they just stole the keys to the entire digital kingdom.
It's a terrifying juxtaposition, honestly. We spend so much time and, budget fortifying the digital perimeter that we often just develop this massive blind spot for the physical one.
Right.
Or the human one, for that matter. I mean, take a purely digital scenario. Say a single employee on their lunch break opens what looks like just a routine invoice attached to an email.
Happens thousands of times a day.
Exactly. But within 24 hours, 230,000 computers across 150 countries are held hostage by the WannaCry ransomware worm.
Oh, man.
Hospital systems go down, global shipping halts, and you just have total catastrophic paralysis. Because, well, a threat actor doesn't care which door they used to get in,
right,
as long as it opens.
Which really brings us to the stakes of what we're doing here today. I mean, if you're stepping into the tech sector, understanding how these digital and physical doors are kicked in isn't just, academic.
No, not at all.
It is the absolute core of your professional survival. So, to make sure you never miss the insider tips that could one day save your network and honestly save your career, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this deep dive.
Yeah, that's crucial.
Also, be sure to dive into the description below for access to additional resources, study materials, and cheat sheets you'll find incredibly valuable as you navigate your professional journey.
You definitely want to utilize those resources, for sure. As independent industry analysts, we spend, a massive amount of time looking at how academic programs actually map to the bleeding edge realities of the tech sector.
We do.
And the materials we curate are specifically designed to help early career professionals in MIS, CIS, and IT really bridge that gap between textbook theory and high-stakes reality of securing a modern enterprise.
Well said. So, welcome to the third of 14 deep dives exploring the academic and practical pathways, detailed in hands-on ethical hacking and network defense, 4th edition.
Yes, welcome back.
Last time, in our review of Chapter 2, we really laid the critical foundation. We did a comprehensive TCP/IP concepts review.
A lot of acronyms in that one.
So many acronyms. But we mapped out the exact handshake protocols, the packet structures, and how computers communicate over a network under ideal authorized conditions.
Right, and understanding that ideal state was an absolute prerequisite. I mean, you cannot defend a system if you don't intimately understand how it functions when it's healthy.
Exactly.
But today, in our exploration of Chapter 3, which is titled Network and Computer Attacks, we're looking at how those exact same protocols are manipulated.
Yeah, how they're weaponized.
Precisely. We're going to dissect the anatomy of malicious software, network-level assaults, and those physical security flaws we just mentioned.
Oh, yeah.
Our mission today is to prepare you to actually fortify the modern enterprise against active, evolving threats.
And I want to start with a fundamental shift in the landscape that the source material points out. Because if we look back at the history of hacking like the 1980s, the 90s, a lot of malware deployment was essentially digital graffiti.
Oh, absolutely.
It was about bragging rights.
Mm-hmm.
Someone would deface a website or write a virus that just replicated itself simply to prove they were smart enough to beat the system.
Right, the notoriety.
But when I look at the network attacks happening today, the motivation has completely transformed. It's an industry now.
Oh, the landscape has fundamentally corporatized. The primary driver of modern malware is no longer notoriety. It is profit. Pure and simple.
Profit.
It is a highly organized, highly lucrative global economy now. And because that profit motive is just so overwhelming, the targets have naturally expanded.
Makes sense.
Yeah, historically, if you were writing a virus, you targeted Windows or Linux because, well, that's where the users were sitting.
Right, the desktop machines.
Yeah, exactly. But today, the attack surface has just exploded. Malware is explicitly written to target the devices we carry in our pockets. Smartphones, tablets, as well as point-of-sale systems, and the billions of Internet of Things, or IoT, devices flooding the market.
It's everywhere.
Attackers are simply following the money and the data.
That makes perfect sense.
Right.
I mean, if I'm a cyber criminal trying to steal credit card data, I'm not going to try to breach the heavily guarded corporate database if I can just, write malware that infects the tablet a barista uses to swipe the card.
Right. It's the path of least resistance.
So let's look at the actual tools they use to accomplish this. The source text dives into the malware ecosystem, and I think we need to establish some technical precision here.
Definitely.
Because in everyday conversation, people use the word virus to describe basically anything that makes their computer run poorly.
Oh, yeah, everything is a virus to my parents.
Right. But from a cybersecurity operations standpoint, what defines a virus mechanically?
Well, precision is everything in incident response. Technically speaking, a virus is a malicious program that attaches itself to a host file or program.
Oh.
The defining mechanical characteristic is its dependency. A virus cannot replicate or operate on its own.
It needs help.
Exactly. It needs that host executable, and crucially, it almost always requires a user action to trigger it.
Ah.
The user has to, click the infected email attachment or run the compromised macro or execute the downloaded file.
I see. So it's parasitic.
Very much so.
So if a virus is a parasite that needs a host and a trigger, how does that mechanism differ from a worm? Because the text treats worms as an entirely different category of threat.
And they are. A worm is a completely different architectural beast. Like a virus, its goal is replication and propagation.
Sure.
But the critical distinction is autonomy.
Autonomy.
Yes. A worm does not need to attach itself to a host program to survive. And most importantly, it does not require any human interaction to spread once it has established a foothold in an environment.
None at all.
None. It moves laterally across networks by actively seeking out and exploiting vulnerabilities in operating systems or network protocols all on its own.
Okay, let me see if I can visualize this. A virus is essentially like a vampire.
Okay, a vampire.
Yeah, it needs to be invited in, right? A user has to click the bad link, open the infected Word document, basically unlock the front door and invite the vampire inside the house.
I like that analogy.
But a worm is like a highly contagious airborne illness.
Right.
Doesn't need an invitation. It just sweeps through the ventilation system of the corporate network, infecting every single vulnerable machine breathing the same air.
That is an incredibly accurate way to model it mentally, yes. And when we examine the specific case studies detailed in our sources, what we could call a rogues gallery of malware, you see exactly how those two different approaches dictate the scale and impact of an attack.
Let's get into it.
Let's look at the viruses first, the vampires that need an invitation. A massive dominating trend right now is ransomware.
Oh, we hear about that all the time.
Because it works. The attacker locks the system or encrypts the files and demands payment for the decryption key. The textbook highlights Ryuk as a prime example of this.
Ryuk is fascinating and honestly terrifying. The sources note that in 2020, Ryuk was responsible for more than 1/3 of all ransomware attacks globally.
A massive market share.
Right. But what stood out to me wasn't just the volume, it was the targeting. They weren't casting a wide net trying to lock up, a grandmother's photo album for $50.
No, that's small potatoes.
Right. They were actively targeting hospitals, government municipalities, and large corporations, demanding multi-million-dollar payouts.
Exactly, because they understood the economics of downtime.
The economics of downtime.
Yes. A hospital cannot afford to have its patient record system locked for a week. Lives are literally at stake.
Wow, yeah.
The attackers know this creates immense pressure to simply pay the ransom immediately. And Ryuk is part of an evolutionary lineage. The source material points to CryptoLocker as the father of many of these modern ransomware families.
Not a CryptoLocker.
Yeah, back in 2013 and 2014, CryptoLocker infected hundreds of thousands of computers.
How exactly does it lock the user out, though? I know it encrypts the files, but mathematically, why can't a really good IT team just break the encryption?
That's the brilliant, evil part. CryptoLocker utilized asymmetric cryptography, which is mathematically brilliant and devastating when used maliciously.
Asymmetric,
Yeah.
meaning not the same on both sides.
Exactly. In asymmetric encryption, there is a public key used to lock the data and a different private key used to unlock it.
Okay, follow.
The malware uses the public key to encrypt your documents, spreadsheets, and databases into inaccessible containers. But the private key, the only thing that can unlock them, remains on the attacker's command and control server.
Ah, so it's not even on your machine.
Nope. Without that private key, breaking modern encryption algorithms like RSA 2048 would take a supercomputer literally thousands of years.
So you're just stuck.
You're stuck.
Yeah.
The victim is left staring at a countdown timer on their screen. Pay the cryptocurrency within 72 hours, or the private key is deleted forever.
And because it's a virus, this whole catastrophic chain of events starts because one person clicked a link in a phishing email.
One person, one click.
That's wild.
Yeah.
But the extortion doesn't stop at just locking files, right? Sometimes the goal is silent theft.
Yes.
The text mentions ForBook, which operates on a model called Malware as a Service. And I want to unpack this because it basically sounds like software franchising applied to cybercrime.
That's exactly what it is. ForBook is a highly effective data stealer. Once it infects a machine, it silently grabs the contents of the Windows clipboard, logs every single keystroke, and steals credentials right out of web browsers. But the architectural shift is that malware is a service model. The original developers of ForBook, they don't take the risk of deploying it themselves. No, they lease it out. They sell subscriptions to the malware on the dark web.
Wait, so someone who has zero programming skills, someone who couldn't write a hello world script in Python, can just go and rent an enterprise-grade cyber weapon.
Yes. It drastically lowers the barrier to entry. This bridges the gap between the academic study of cryptography and the gritty, real-world business of digital crime.
That is unsettling.
Very. If an aspiring criminal has a few $100s in cryptocurrency, they can rent ForBook, rent access to a botnet to send out 1 million spam emails, and they are suddenly a global threat actor.
Wow.
This is where early career IT professionals need to be hypervigilant. You aren't just defending against elite nation-state hackers anymore. You are defending against a massive, decentralized workforce of opportunistic criminals using rented tools.
And the targeting gets incredibly precise, too. We mentioned IoT and point-of-sale systems earlier. Let's look at MalumPOS and Carbonac.
Two very interesting examples.
Yeah. MalumPOS was designed specifically to target point-of-sale systems at hotel chains. It utilized RAM scraping.
RAM scraping.
Right. And from what I understand, even if a credit card transaction is encrypted when it's sent to the bank, the data has to exist in an unencrypted state in the system's memory, the RAM, for just a split second while it's being processed.
Correct.
So MalumPOS just sat there in the memory, scraping the magnetic strip data as it passed through.
It's an elegant, highly specialized attack, and Carbonac took it a step further.
Oh, yeah.
They targeted the banking infrastructure itself. It typically started with a targeted phishing email to a bank employee using a malicious Microsoft Word document.
A vampire needing an invitation.
Exactly. Once the virus executed, it established a backdoor. The attackers would then live off the land, moving laterally through the bank's network until they found the systems controlling the ATMs, or the SWIFT transfer network.
And then what?
They literally forced ATMs to dispense cash at specific times where money mules were waiting on the street to collect it.
It's literally a digital bank heist.
It really is.
And it all relies on establishing that initial beachhead. Another example the text brings up is Gumblar, which mass-hacked PHP websites.
Gumblar was huge.
Yeah, it would steal FTP credentials, the usernames and passwords used to upload files to a web server, and then inject malicious code into the websites themselves, turning legitimate businesses into distribution hubs for more malware.
Turning the victims into accomplices, basically.
Or a G-code, which we kind of touched on with the encryption concept earlier. He used 1024-bit asymmetric key encryption to hold files hostage. The level of cryptographic sophistication being weaponized against everyday users is just staggering.
It illustrates the arms race, really. As defenders implement stronger access controls, attackers leverage stronger cryptography to lock us out of our own systems.
Okay, so those are the viruses, the vampires. They need that initial human error. Let's shift to the worms, the airborne illnesses that spread autonomously.
This is where it gets crazy.
And any discussion of worms in the modern era has to start with WannaCry.
Oh, absolutely. WannaCry, which launched in 2017, is the textbook definition of a crypto worm. It combined the devastating payload of ransomware with the self-propagating nature of a worm.
Best of both worlds. Worse for us.
Right. It exploited a specific vulnerability in the Microsoft Windows Server Message Block, or SMB, protocol. Now, SMB is the standard protocol Windows uses for sharing files and printers across a local network.
Okay, so if I'm in an office and I send a document to the network printer down the hall, I'm likely using SMB.
Correct. The vulnerability, which was known as EternalBlue, allowed an attacker to execute arbitrary code on a target machine simply by sending specially crafted packets to the SMB port.
Just sending a packet, no clicking required.
No clicking. Once WannaCry infected a single machine, maybe through an initial phishing email, it didn't need any more human help. It aggressively scanned the internal network and the broader internet, looking for any other machine with an unpatched SMB service.
Just sniffing around?
Yes. When it found one, it exploited the vulnerability, copied itself over, dropped the ransomware payload to lock the files, and then that newly infected machine began scanning for more targets.
And it resulted in over 230,000 computers infected in a single day.
It was a global panic.
The speed is what makes worms so terrifying. But not all worms are designed to be loud and demand a ransom, right? The source text details worms that are effectively nation-state level weapons, specifically Flame and Stuxnet.
Yes. Flame, which was discovered around 2012, is widely considered one of the most complex pieces of malware ever analyzed.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It wasn't designed for a smash-and-grab ransom. It was a highly sophisticated espionage toolkit.
Wow.
Once it infiltrated a network, it could secretly turn on computer microphones to record conversations, hijack webcams, log keystrokes, capture screenshots, and even intercept Bluetooth communications from nearby mobile devices.
That is terrifying.
And all while remaining completely undetected by traditional antivirus software.
And then there's Stuxnet. I mean, if Flame is an espionage tool, Stuxnet is a guided missile.
It really is.
It fundamentally changed the paradigm of cybersecurity. Discovered in 2010, it was found on the industrial control systems of a nuclear production facility in Iran.
Yeah.
And the text notes, it was likely introduced via a physical USB drive, which bridges the air gap, the physical isolation of a secure network from the internet.
Right, because if a network isn't touching the internet, you can't hack it from across the world. You have to bridge that air gap, and bridging that was critical.
Right.
But once Stuxnet was inside, it acted as a highly specialized worm. It used multiple zero-day vulnerabilities in Windows to propagate through the facility's network.
0 days, meaning no one knew about them yet.
Exactly, completely unpatched. However, its payload wasn't designed to steal data. Its target was the programmable logic controllers, the PLCs that governed the physical machinery.
The actual machine.
Specifically, the software controlling uranium enrichment centrifuges. Stuxnet intercepted the commands between the Windows machines and the PLCs.
Okay.
It fed false, normal-looking telemetry data back to the human operators, so everything looked totally fine on their screens,
Sneaky.
while simultaneously commanding the centrifuges to spin at erratic destructive frequencies until they physically tore themselves apart.
It proves that malicious code can destroy concrete and steel. It's not just data on a screen anymore.
The game totally changed.
The text mentions Duquay as well, which shared a lot of design architecture with Stuxnet, but was deployed to steal intelligence from government agencies in Europe and the Middle East. It shows how these core architectures are repurposed over time.
They recycled the good code. We also have to look at the worms designed for sheer scale and disruption, the ones used to build massive botnets.
Botnets.
Yeah, a botnet is a network of compromised zombie computers acting under a single attacker's control. The source material lists Storm, Waladak, and Conficker as prime examples.
I was really struck by the psychological tactics used by the Waladak worm.
Yeah.
Because building a botnet is a technical challenge, obviously, but Waladak used a very human vector to spread.
It did.
It utilized geographic IP lookups to customize its phishing lures.
Oh.
So if I live in Chicago, Waladak would determine my location based on my IP address and send me an email that looked like a breaking Reuters news alert claiming a dirty bomb had just exploded in Chicago.
It weaponizes panic.
Completely.
If you receive an email saying your city is under attack, human nature takes over. Your critical thinking just shuts down and you click the link for more information.
And that's all it takes.
That click executes the worm, your machine becomes part of the botnet, and the worm uses your address book to send out more localized threats.
It's manipulation at an industrial scale.
Yeah.
And we can't forget the Slammer worm from 2003.
Oh, Slammer.
The text notes, it was so aggressive and replicated so fast that it flooded networks globally. It reportedly shut down over 110,000 ATMs for a major U.S. bank.
Mm-hmm.
Not because it targeted the ATMs directly, but simply by infecting the underlying database servers on the same network and completely overwhelming the bandwidth.
The collateral damage of a fast-moving worm is immense.
Huge.
Slammer is a fascinating case study in efficiency, too. The entire worm was only 376 bytes.
Bytes, not megabytes.
Bytes. It fit inside a single network packet. It didn't need to write itself to the hard drive. It existed entirely in the system's memory. It could infect a vulnerable SQL server, generate a random IP address, and send a copy of itself to that new address in a fraction of a second. It infected the vast majority of vulnerable servers on the entire internet within 10 minutes.
10 minutes. That is unreal. Okay, so we've covered the brute force attacks, the worms smashing through the network infrastructure, the viruses locking down data for ransom.
Full-out stuff.
Right. But here is where we need to look at the quieter side of the spectrum. If I have spent a fortune on enterprise firewalls and intrusion detection systems, how do the stealthier attacks slip past those defenses? The source material points us toward deception, specifically Trojans.
Yes. Trojans are arguably the most insidious attacks facing networks today. They derive their name from the Trojan horse of antiquity for a very literal reason. A Trojan disguises itself as a useful, legitimate program.
Looking like a gift.
Exactly. A user might think they are downloading a free system optimization utility, a game, or a necessary software update. But hidden inside that legitimate-looking software wrapper is a malicious payload. Usually that payload is a backdoor or a rootkit.
Now, the source defines a rootkit as a program that hides deep within the operating system tools, giving attackers a means of regaining access later while remaining invisible to standard system scans.
Right.
But wait, if I'm understanding this, a corporate firewall's entire job is to block unauthorized traffic.
Yes, it is.
So if a rootkit tries to phone home to an attacker's server, shouldn't the firewall see that unauthorized connection and just drop the traffic?
Well, a well-configured firewall will absolutely block traffic trying to communicate over unfamiliar or non-standard ports. But attackers are highly adaptable. They realize they can't force a new door open, so they walk through the doors the business absolutely must leave open.
Oh, clever.
They design Trojans to communicate over the exact same common ports that are required for day-to-day operations.
Ah, so they use the ports for web browsing, like TCP port 80 for regular unencrypted web traffic, or port 443 for HTTPS.
Precisely. And UDP port 53 for DNS lookups.
Right.
Think about it. A company cannot function if its employees can't access the internet or resolve domain names. Therefore, the firewall is configured to allow traffic out on port 80, 443, and 53.
They have to.
The text provides a table mapping this out. Look at the Emotet Trojan. It communicates over ports 80 and 443, or TrickBot. If the firewall simply sees HTTP traffic and allows it because, well, that's just web browsing, the Trojan's command and control communication blends right in with employees checking the news or logging into cloud applications.
It is hiding in plain sight.
Exactly, hiding in plain sight.
That makes defending against them incredibly complex. I mean, you can't just unplug the internet.
Not if you want to stay in business.
But the deception doesn't just rely on fake software downloads. The text brings up macro viruses, which exploit the very productivity tools businesses rely on every single day.
Yes, macro viruses, with the infamous Melissa virus from 1999 being the classic textbook example. To understand the threat, you have to understand the utility. Right. A macro is essentially a list of programmatic commands designed to automate repetitive tasks in applications like Microsoft Word or Excel. They are incredibly powerful for business productivity. They're typically written in Visual Basic for applications or VBA.
Because VBA is a programming language capable of executing system commands, it can be coded to execute malicious commands just as easily as it can format a financial spreadsheet.
Exactly. And the real danger, as the source text highlights, is the accessibility of the attack vector.
What do you mean?
You do not need to be a low-level C++ developer to write a destructive macro.
Heh.
Anyone can find step-by-step tutorials online to create macro viruses that delete critical system files, alter data, or act as a downloader for more complex malware the moment a document is opened.
So simple. And this brings us to a category that I think causes a lot of debate. Spyware and adware.
Oh, this is a fun one.
Now, spyware makes total sense as a critical threat. The text outlines how it stealthily exfiltrates confidential financial data, passwords, and PINs. It can include software keyloggers that register every single keystroke.
Yes.
Having an unknown entity halfway around the world recording everything you type, every login, every email, is undeniably a massive breach.
Huge breach.
But I struggle with the adware panic.
Okay, let's explore that. What's the hesitation?
Well, the text notes that adware is similar to spyware, but its main purpose is to track purchasing habits to serve tailored advertisements, often displaying pop-up banners.
Right.
Now, if I am a network administrator, I have limited resources. I have actual fires to fight. Stuxnet variants are out there. Ryuk is locking up hospitals.
Sure.
Why should I dedicate critical IT resources to tracking down a program whose only sin is showing an employee targeted ads for shoes they just looked at on Amazon? Isn't adware just an annoying marketing tool?
I get that logic, but it's a very common, very dangerous misconception. You have to look past the annoyance of the pop-up ad and analyze what the presence of adware actually proves about the state of your network's security posture.
Okay.
First, from a purely operational standpoint, adware is parasitic. It consumes system resources, slows down the endpoint, and eats up network bandwidth.
Okay, so it degrades performance,
Yeah.
but it's not stealing source code.
True, but consider the deeper architectural implications. If adware is installed and running on a corporate endpoint without the explicit authorization of the user or the IT department, it proves a catastrophic failure of access control.
Ah, I see where you're going.
It proves that unauthorized executable code is successfully running on your machine. Furthermore, it proves there is an active covert communication channel sending corporate data, even if it's just browsing habits right now out of your network, to an untrusted third party.
I see. It's not about the ads. It's about the open window. It's the canary in the coal mine.
Precisely. If an attacker can slip adware past your firewall and your antivirus to track shopping habits, they can use that exact same delivery mechanism and execution pathway to slip in a keylogger, a rootkit, or a ransomware payload.
So you can't ignore it.
You cannot tolerate any unauthorized code execution, period. It means your perimeter is porous.
That reframes it completely. You have to shut the window no matter how small the bug is that flew in.
Exactly.
And speaking of slipping things past defenses, the sources detail how attackers hide these malicious programs in plain sight within email systems using something called base64 encoding.
Yes, base64.
I want to spend a minute here because understanding this translation process is so vital for defenders. How does base64 smuggle malware?
To understand the exploit, you have to look at the history of the protocol. Email systems, specifically SMTP or Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, were originally designed in an era when people only needed to send plain text.
Right.
The system was built to handle 7-bit ASCII characters, basically the letters, numbers, and punctuation you see on a standard keyboard.
But an executable program like a virus isn't text. It's compiled binary code. It's raw 8-bit data.
Correct. If you try to send raw binary data through an old text-based email system, the system misinterprets the data, corrupts the file, and the transmission fails.
It just breaks.
It breaks. So the tech industry developed a legitimate workaround, base64 encoding. When you want to attach a complex binary file like a high-resolution photograph or a PDF, the email client encodes that binary data into a text-based format.
How does it do that?
It takes 3 bytes of binary data, splits it into 4 chunks, and maps each chunk to one of 64 printable ASCII characters.
So a complex file just looks like a giant meaningless block of random letters and numbers to the email server.
Exactly. It's text, so the server allows it through. And attackers weaponize this legitimate translation process. They will take a malicious executable shell, a piece of code that provides an interface to issue commands directly to the operating system, and they encode it in base64. They bury this encoded block within an email attachment to a basic security filter that only scans for known malicious binary signatures. It just looks like a harmless block of text.
Wow.
But when the user opens the attachment, the system dutifully decodes the base64, reassembles the executable shell, and the machine is compromised.
So it unpacks itself.
Yes. This is why incident responders must routinely run base64 decoders on suspicious attachments to reveal the hidden code. A command shell should never be smuggled inside an email.
Never. We've covered the profit-driven malware, the stealthy data stealers, and the deceptive Trojans. We've seen how they sneak in. But what happens when the attacker's goal isn't theft or espionage?
Sometimes they just want to break things.
Exactly. What if their goal is pure, unadulterated disruption of business continuity? This takes us into the realm of network-level assaults, tearing down the infrastructure itself.
This is where the threat model shifts from covert infiltration to overt denial of service. The most fundamental attack in this category is the denial of service, or DOS attack. The objective here is not to steal information. It is to paralyze the system. You flood a network or a server with so much garbage traffic that it becomes overwhelmed and cannot process legitimate requests. You literally deny the service to the users who need it.
The textbook highlights a historical example of this that I think perfectly illustrates the concept, the ping of death.
A classic.
It sounds incredibly dramatic, but the mechanics behind it are fascinating.
The ping of death was a major threat in the late 1990s, and it exploited a fundamental vulnerability in how operating systems handled the ICMP protocol, the Internet Control Message Protocol.
Okay.
Usually, a ping is a tiny diagnostic packet sent to check if a computer is online. The specifications dictate that the maximum allowed size for an IP packet is 65,535 bytes.
So the attacker just creates a packet larger than that to crash the system.
Yeah.
But wait, how does it get across the network if the network rules don't allow packets that big?
That's where the fragmentation exploit comes in. The attacker would craft a maliciously oversized packet. Because the network infrastructure, the routers and switches, wouldn't transmit a packet larger than the maximum transmission unit, or MTU, the attacker would fragment the oversized packet into smaller, valid pieces.
Oh, they break it up.
They break it up. Those pieces travel across the network perfectly fine. But when the victim's computer receives all the fragments and attempts to reassemble them in its memory buffer, the total size exceeds the 65,535 byte limit.
And boom.
Boom. The operating system's memory overflows, causing the machine to freeze, crash, or reboot.
It's like trying to shove a giant illegal piece of furniture through a small door by taking it apart. The bouncer at the door lets the small pieces through because they fit the rules, but when the person inside the room tries to put the furniture back together, it's so massive it crushes them and destroys the room.
That's a great analogy, actually. Now, operating system vendors patched that specific reassembly vulnerability decades ago, but the concept of overwhelming a system evolved into the distributed denial of service, or DDoS attack.
DDoS, extra D.
Right. Instead of one attacker using a clever fragmentation trick, an attacker utilizes the botnets we discussed earlier. They command tens of thousands or even millions of compromised zombie computers to simultaneously flood a single target with traffic.
The bandwidth simply drops to zero. Legitimate customers can't access the website. Employees can't access the VPN.
Total standstill.
But there is a tactical evolution mentioned in the text that I find deeply unsettling. The dark DDoS. Why would an attacker want to launch a massive, noisy attack if their goal is stealth?
Because a dark DDoS is the ultimate misdirection. Imagine you are managing a corporate IT infrastructure. Suddenly, your external web servers are hit with a massive DDoS attack.
Alarms everywhere.
Every monitoring alarm is blaring. It is a 5-alarm fire. You pull every available engineer to mitigate the attack, reroute traffic, and coordinate with your internet service provider.
All hands on deck. Everyone is looking at the front door.
Exactly. But the DDoS is just a loud smokescreen. While the entire security team is distracted by the front door being battered down, the real threat actor is quietly slipping through the back door.
Hello.
They use the chaos to execute a stealthy data exfiltration attack, stealing the customer database, or quietly deploying a ransomware payload across the internal servers. They use disruption as a diversion.
Misdirection at a corporate scale. Now, besides flooding the network with traffic, attackers can also crash systems or completely take them over using something called a buffer overflow attack.
These are nasty.
The source material spends a significant amount of time on this concept, and it's critical to understand. Let's break this down. What exactly is a memory buffer, and how does overflowing it lead to a system compromise?
To understand the vulnerability, we have to look at memory architecture. Think of a buffer as a temporary holding area in a computer's RAM.
Okay.
When a programmer writes an application, they must define how much memory space a specific input should require. For example, if a program asks a user to input a standard 5-digit zip code, the programmer allocates a buffer that can hold exactly 5 characters of data.
Makes logical sense. Don't waste memory.
But what happens if a malicious user inputs a string of 50,000 characters instead of 5?
Oh boy.
If the code is robust, it checks the length of the input before accepting it and rejects the oversized data. But if the code is poorly written, often in languages like C or C++ that do not inherently enforce bounds, checking the application accepts the 50,000 characters.
And it overflows.
The data overflows the allocated 5-character boundary and spills into adjacent memory spaces, overwriting whatever data or instructions were stored there.
Okay, let me try an analogy here. Imagine a buffer overflow is like a VIP guest list at a highly exclusive club.
Okay, I'm tracking.
The programmer allocates one seat at the table for the VIP. But the bouncer at the door, the poorly written code doesn't verify how many people are walking in behind the VIP.
Right.
The VIP walks in, followed by 50 malicious friends who just slip right past the unchecked door. They fill the entire club, push all the legitimate guests out, and suddenly they've taken over the DJ booth and are running the whole party.
That perfectly captures the dynamic. In a computer system, those 50 malicious friends are actually executable machine code. By overflowing the buffer, the attacker pushes their own malicious instructions into a part of memory where the operating system expects to find legitimate program instructions.
Oh, that's bad.
It is. Specifically, they overwrite the instruction pointer, which tells the CPU what to execute next. The CPU unwittingly executes the attacker's code, which typically elevates the attacker's permissions to an administrator or root level, granting them total unmitigated control over the machine.
And this is not just theoretical computer science. The text provides a chilling list of real-world buffer overflow vulnerabilities that have targeted core infrastructure.
Yeah.
Let's walk through some of these because it highlights that even the defenders are vulnerable, starting with the Cisco ASA.
Cisco ASA devices are enterprise-grade firewalls and VPN concentrators. They sit on the absolute perimeter of thousands of corporate networks. They are the guards.
Right.
The source details a vulnerability in their internet key exchange process, which handles VPN setups. By sending a specially crafted, oversized packet to the firewall, an unauthenticated attacker anywhere on the internet could trigger a buffer overflow.
Wow.
They could execute code and gain full administrative privileges over the firewall itself. They bypass the perimeter by owning the perimeter.
That's a nightmare scenario. And it affects foundational operating system libraries, too. Look at the Ghost vulnerability.
Ghost was a massive discovery. It exploited a weakness in the glib library, which is a core foundational component of almost all Linux operating systems. It handles domain name resolution. Under the right conditions, triggering a buffer overflow in this library allowed an attacker to gain remote administrative access with 0 credentials required.
The text also mentions Palo Alto's PAN-OS in 2020, another firewall vulnerability where a remote attacker could disrupt system processes or execute arbitrary code. But it's not just giant corporate servers. The threat model has moved to our pockets. The text details the stagefright vulnerability on Android devices.
Stagefright perfectly illustrates the evolution of the threat. This was a buffer overflow vulnerability buried deep in Android's multimedia playback libraries. To exploit it, an attacker simply needed to send a specially crafted MMS, a multimedia text message containing a malicious video file to a target's phone number.
So the user clicks the video, and it infects the phone.
That's the terrifying part. No user interaction was required.
Wait, really?
Really. To optimize the user experience, the Android operating system would process the incoming video file in the background to generate a preview thumbnail before the user ever opened the messaging app.
Oh, man.
That background processing triggered the buffer overflow, executed the attacker's code, and compromised the device. It was a true zero-click exploit.
That is deeply unsettling. And the NSA even had to issue alerts in 2020 about buffer overflows of popular VPN products from Pulse Secure, Palo Alto, and Fortinet, allowing arbitrary file downloads.
Oh, and we can't forget the Windows Server service vulnerability from 2008, MS08067.
Ah, yes.
This is the exact buffer overflow vulnerability that the Conficker worm used to spread globally.
Exactly. Buffer overflows are historically one of the most devastating and heavily exploited classes of vulnerabilities in the history of computing.
So as an industry, how do we fix this? If the firewalls themselves are vulnerable, the VPNs are vulnerable, we can't just buy another security tool to put in front of the broken tool. What is this systemic solution?
The source material points us toward a fundamental philosophical shift in how we build and deploy software.
DevSecOps.
Development, security, and operations.
Yes. For decades, the software lifecycle was siloed. Programmers wrote the code, operations deployed it, and security tried to wrap a protective shell around it after the fact.
Right, bolted on later.
But as we just discussed, a buffer overflow is a flaw in the fundamental architecture of the code itself. You cannot patch a broken architectural design with a firewall. DevSecOps mandates that security is shifted left into the development phase.
Make them build it secure from the start.
It means training the programming team to write secure code from day one to always, without fail, verify input size against buffer capacity. It requires automated security testing integrated directly into the deployment pipeline. It's a massive mindset change that early career MIS and CIS professionals absolutely must champion in their organizations.
That is a vital takeaway. You can't bolt security on at the end. It has to be baked into the DNA of the product. So let's take stock of where we are. We've covered attackers trying to crash the network infrastructure, and we've covered attackers trying to deploy malware to endpoints. But what if the network is running perfectly? There is no DDoS attack, the endpoints are fully patched, and the code is secure. How do attackers steal data while it is actively in transit between users and servers? Let's move into the realm of interception and session hijacking.
If data is moving across a wire or through the air via Wi-Fi, it is inherently vulnerable to interception. The most passive form of this is eavesdropping.
Just listening in.
Right. Attackers will use sniffing tools, software designed to capture copies of the packets traversing a network segment. If the communication is unencrypted, the attacker can read everything in clear text. They are looking for confidential corporate data, or, more commonly, administrative credentials like usernames and passwords that they can use to log in legitimately and extend their attack.
But the text notes, it gets much more active than just passively listening. It details man-in-the-middle, or MITM, attacks. How does an attacker physically insert themselves into a digital conversation?
They don't need physical insertion. They use logical misdirection. In a man-in-the-middle attack, the attacker actively manipulates the network routing, often through techniques like ARP spoofing on a local network, or setting up a rogue Wi-Fi access point at a coffee shop.
Makey.
Very. System A thinks it is communicating directly with System B, and System B thinks it's communicating with System A. But in reality, both systems are routing their traffic through the attacker's machine. The attacker relays the messages back and forth, allowing them to not only read the traffic, but actively alter or inject malicious commands into the data stream in real time.
And the text takes it a step further with network session hijacking.
Yes, session hijacking is incredibly potent. When a user logs into a server, the server assigns them a unique session ID to track their authenticated state so they don't have to enter their password for every single click.
That makes sense.
But if an attacker can intercept or mathematically predict that TCP session ID, they can spoof their identity. They join the established session, essentially kicking the legitimate user out, and take over the authenticated connection with the server. To the server, the attacker looks exactly like the authorized user.
Okay, if I am a network defender tasked with securing this infrastructure, how do I stop someone from pulling packets out of thin air? I can't physically guard every inch of Ethernet cable in the building, and I definitely can't guard the Wi-Fi signals bouncing around the parking lot.
This connects directly back to our previous deep dive on Chapter 2, where we reviewed TCP/IP. The defense against eavesdropping, MITM attacks, and interception relies entirely on robust cryptography.
Encryption.
Yes. You have to operate under the assumption that the network is inherently hostile. You must force all applications and network equipment to communicate exclusively over encrypted protocols. You move away from clear text protocols like HTTP, Telnet, and FTP, and mandate HTTPS, SSH, and SFTP.
So even if the attacker captures the packet, all they see is mathematical gibberish.
Exactly. And to prevent man-in-the-middle attacks, you must utilize valid, trusted digital certificates. This allows System A to mathematically verify through a trusted third-party certificate authority that System B is exactly who it claims to be, and not an attacker masquerading as the destination.
Assume breach, encrypt everything, verify identity constantly. Okay, this brings us to the final and perhaps the most critical piece of our puzzle: fortifying the human and physical perimeter.
This is the big one.
Because we can build the strongest digital firewalls, deploy mathematically perfect encryption algorithms, and write flawless DevSecOps code. But as we discussed at the very beginning of this deep dive, none of that matters if the human operating the machine is tricked, or if the physical door to the server room is left unlocked.
Cybersecurity is a holistic discipline. You cannot secure the digital without securing the physical and the human. The source material lays out the digital endpoint defenses first. Antivirus software is the absolute baseline. It operates primarily through signature-based detection, comparing the files on a computer against a massive database of known malicious code patterns. It also utilizes heuristic analysis, which looks for suspicious programmatic behaviors, like a program suddenly trying to encrypt thousands of files, even if the specific signature hasn't been seen before.
But the text is clear that AV isn't a silver bullet. You have to update that signature file constantly because new malware strains drop every single hour.
Oh, constantly.
To supplement AV, the text discusses sandboxing. This allows users to run untrusted programs or open suspicious documents in a secure, isolated operating environment. If the file is malicious, it detonates inside the sandbox, unable to write to the actual hard drive or access the network.
The great safety net.
We also see the need for specialized endpoint tools like Malwarebytes Anti-Malware or MBAM and Hitman Pro to specifically root out the deep-seated spyware and adware that traditional AV engines might overlook.
But relying solely on technical tools is a losing strategy. The other half of the equation is the human element. The textbook heavily emphasizes the absolute necessity of structured, ongoing user education.
Not just an onboarding video.
No, this cannot be a one-time onboarding video. It means involving all employees, from the mailroom to the C-suite, in the security culture. It involves practical steps like sending out monthly security updates, detailing new phishing trends, and training employees on how to scrutinize email headers and URLs.
From an administrative perspective, the text also suggests application whitelisting. This flips the traditional security model on its head. Instead of blacklisting, trying to block every bad program in the world, which is impossible, you whitelist.
Exactly.
You configure the operating system to only allow explicitly approved, cryptographically signed programs to execute. Everything else is blocked by default.
Whitelisting is incredibly effective, though it requires rigorous administrative upkeep to ensure users actually have the tools they need to work.
Now, I want to push back on the user education piece for a moment.
Okay, let's hear it.
I struggle with this part of the text. Honestly, if an employee has been through the training and they still click on an obvious phishing link for the third time, a part of me thinks we are being too soft.
Too soft.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why shouldn't an IT department use fear tactics, send out incredibly realistic fake phishing emails, and if an employee clicks it, a giant red screen pops up that says, "You just cost the company $5 million in a simulated ransomware attack. Report to HR immediately."
Doesn't fear create ultimate compliance?
I understand the frustration that leads to that line of thinking, but as an ethical security professional, you must strongly reject that approach. And the source case is very explicit about this.
Really?
Yes, using fear tactics to scare users into compliance is not only detrimental to morale, it actually degrades your security posture. The text specifically points out that utilizing fear goes directly against the OSSTMM, the Open Source Security Testing Methodology Manual Rules of Engagement.
How does it degrade security, though? If they're terrified, they won't click. Because unethical security testers use fear to generate business, true professionals promote awareness. Think about human psychology. If you terrify an employee, what happens when they inevitably make a mistake? A terrified employee will immediately try to hide their error. They will close the window, clear their history, and pray nothing bad happens. An educated, supported employee who feels like a partner in defense will immediately pick up the phone and call the IT help desk.
I see.
That immediate reporting gives the incident response team a crucial head start on isolating the machine and mitigating the damage before the malware can spread laterally. You want your users to be an early warning system, not adversaries hiding from their own IT department.
That reframes it perfectly.
Yeah.
Shadow IT and hidden mistakes are far more dangerous than an honest error reported instantly.
Exactly.
And that focus on human behavior ties directly into the final element, physical security.
Yeah.
The textbook makes a point that is honestly jarring if you've only ever focused on software. We talked in our opening hook about the delivery driver picking the lock. The text notes that an average person, someone with maybe a week or two of practice watching online tutorials, can pick a standard American home deadbolt lock in less than 5 minutes.
Less than 5 minutes for an amateur. And the reality is, many small to medium-sized businesses use those exact same standard deadbolts on their server room doors.
And what about experienced hackers? People who practice physical penetration testing as part of their operations.
An experienced physical pen tester can pick that same deadbolt in under 30 seconds, often faster using a rake or a bump key.
30 seconds to physically bypass millions of dollars of layered network security architecture.
Exactly. The text mentions that rotary locks, which require pushing in a sequence of numbered bars, offer a slightly higher barrier to entry than standard deadbolts. But neither type of traditional lock solves the fundamental systemic problem of physical security.
Which is?
They do not maintain an access log. You have zero record of who entered the room or at what time.
So if a critical database server goes offline at 3:00 a.m. on a Sunday, and the door lock is a standard brass key, the IT team has no idea if the server experienced a hardware failure or if an unauthorized person walked in and physically yanked a network cable out of the wall.
You have zero visibility. This is why the textbook strongly advocates for electronic security card solutions, or RFID badges. An electronic system keeps a permanent audit trail. You know exactly whose credential was used to open the door down to the second.
That makes sense.
However, we also know that credentials can be stolen or cloned. And because the highest risk of attack often comes from inside the organization, either a malicious insider or an employee whose badge was compromised, organizations securing highly sensitive areas must implement biometric devices.
Things like fingerprint readers, retinal scans, or facial recognition.
Yes, biometrics provide a secondary inheritance-based authentication factor. A stolen security card can get you to the door, but a stolen card cannot fake a retinal scan. You must aggressively protect the physical hardware holding the data.
Because if an attacker gains physical access, they can deploy hardware vulnerabilities that completely circumvent the digital perimeter.
The text highlights hardware keyloggers.
Very dangerous.
We talked extensively about software keyloggers earlier when discussing spyware and Trojans, but a hardware keylogger is a completely different threat. It is a physical device placed literally in line between the keyboard plug and the computer's USB port.
Yep.
Or, as the text shows, they can be tiny Wi-Fi USB keyloggers that look exactly like a standard thumb drive, or they can even be maliciously manufactured directly into the keyboard's internal circuitry.
And this is why physical access is game over. Those hardware keyloggers are practically invisible to the endpoint's antivirus software. They intercept the electrical signals of the keystrokes at the hardware level before the data even reaches the operating system or the security software.
Wow, so the AV doesn't even see it. Doesn't even know it's there. The attacker doesn't need to exfiltrate the data through the corporate firewall either. The Wi-Fi keylogger creates its own out-of-band communication channel. The attacker can literally sit in a car in the corporate parking lot and pull administrator passwords over an invisible Wi-Fi network.
Unbelievable.
This is precisely why the text mandates that random physical visual inspections must be periodically conducted on the premises to detect unauthorized hardware. You have to physically walk the floor and look at the backs of the machines.
It really brings the entire discipline full circle. You cannot just be a digital architect writing secure code. You have to be a physical guard dog, too. You have to secure the code, secure the network, train the humans, and lock the physical doors.
It is a massive, multidisciplinary responsibility. But that complexity is exactly what makes the field of cybersecurity operations so dynamic, challenging, and utterly critical to the survival of the modern enterprise.
Let's recap the massive journey we've taken through the source material today. We started by examining the fundamental shift in the attacker's motivation, moving from bragging rights to a highly organized, profit-driven malware ecosystem that targets everything from IoT devices to enterprise servers.
The corporatization of malware?
Right. We broke down the mechanical differences between viruses that require a host and a human trigger, like the devastating Ryuk ransomware, and worms that spread autonomously, like the global WannaCry event or the physically destructive nation-state Stuxnet.
From there, we explored the stealthy, deceptive attacks. We looked at how Trojans hide in plain sight on allowed network ports like 80 and 53, how macroviruses weaponize the very productivity tools businesses rely on, and the very real architectural threat of adware and spyware acting as a covert foothold for deeper compromise.
We also decoded how attackers smuggle executable code past filters using base64 encoding.
Then we looked at how attackers tear down the infrastructure itself. We moved from the historic ping of death to modern DDoS attacks, sometimes using a dark DDoS as a smokescreen for data theft. We took a deep dive into memory architecture to understand how buffer overflow vulnerabilities, like the ones that compromise Cisco and Palo Alto devices, allow attackers to execute arbitrary code.
And we highlighted the critical importance of DevSecOps in preventing those flaws from ever being written into the code in the first place.
We connected the interception of data and session hijacking directly back to the TCP/IP concepts we learned, underscoring the absolute necessity for robust encryption and certificate validation.
And finally, we grounded all of this digital theory in physical reality. We emphasized the necessity of structured, supportive user education over fear tactics and confronted the stark truth that a 30-second lockpick can render millions of dollars of digital defenses completely useless if you don't control physical access with logging and biometrics.
It brings us right back to our opening scenario. Whether it's the attacker bypassing the deadbolt in 30 seconds to drop a Wi-Fi keylogger, or a single employee inadvertently launching the WannaCry worm from their inbox, true cybersecurity operations require defending against both the digital and the physical threats simultaneously. You have to secure every possible vector.
And providing you with the analytical framework to secure every vector is exactly what this curriculum is designed to achieve. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. If you found this breakdown valuable for your career growth, please like, subscribe, and share.
And seriously, don't forget to check the description for access to those additional resources, study guides, and toolkits we mentioned. They are there to help you bridge the gap between theory and practice.
I also highly encourage you to explore the channel's other educational resources, playlists, and videos to continuously expand your knowledge base.
Yes. If you found today's granular discussion on malware mechanics and physical security interesting, I strongly recommend checking out our Digital Forensics Deep Dive series, where we talk about how to investigate and trace these breaches after they happen, and our Network and System Security series for more advanced architectural defense strategies.
Make sure you're subscribed because next week we are moving into Chapter 4, Footprinting and Social Engineering. We will be exploring how attackers actively map out your entire digital footprint and manipulate human psychology before they even launch a single exploit. It is fascinating, slightly terrifying stuff.
It really is the critical reconnaissance phase of the attack cycle.
Before we go, I want to leave you with a final reflective question based on everything we covered today. Take a hard look at your own organization or the enterprise you are preparing to join. What is the absolute weakest link in your defense right now? Is it the legacy code running on a server without proper input validation? Is it the unencrypted internal network traffic passing between departments? Or is it simply the physical front door to the server room that anyone with a YouTube tutorial and 5 minutes of practice could push open? Think about it. Master the attack, fortify the defense. Until next time, keep your hands on the keys and your network secure.